my own daughter, who was 14 years old at the time in 2022, pointed to a man in the street on the 11th of June 22 and said, "Dad, that is a Russian spy who's taking a photograph of us." And I said, "Honey, don't try to be like your dad. You're not an investigator. Just let me do the work." And 2 years later, it turns out that that was one of the people who was arrested.
Now, here's a phrase. Can we look into this guy? Would it raise too many questions? That's the chilling question that Jan Maroslek, the Wirecard executive and Russian spy master and one of the world's most wanted men, posted on a Telegram channel. The guy he was referring to was Christo Grozev, an investigative journalist for Bellingcat. Earlier that day, Christo and his colleagues had published a major investigation alleging that Russian FSB agents had laced opposition leader Alexei Navalny's underwear with Novichok. And the Kremlin, well, they were furious. So what is it like to be targeted by a ring of Russian spies? Well, Christo Grozev joins us now. Christo, welcome. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you for having me.
Christo, this is an extraordinary story, of course, but tell us a little bit about your knowledge of this story. I'm assuming that when you were under observation by the spy ring, you had no idea. So when was the first time you realized you were the target of a spy ring?
Well, there were certain things that happened contemporaneously that suggested that there was some espionage activity. But in retrospect, there are a lot more things that I wish I would have paid more attention to, such as for the fact that my own daughter, who was 14 years old at the time in 2022, pointed to a man in the street on the 11th of June 22 and said, "Dad, that is a Russian spy who's taking a photograph of us." And I said, "Honey, don't try to be like your dad. You're not an investigator. Just let me do the work." And 2 years later, it turns out that that was one of the people who was arrested. And she was right and I was wrong. So yes, I mean, when you're an investigative journalist, you tend to assume that you're not part of the story and that everybody else is. But I should have known better. There were other cases where I knew something was wrong, such as during one trip to speak at a conference in Berlin in 2022 as well. I left my suitcase with the concierge at the hotel. And then as I was speaking at the conference, somebody told me that this hotel was actually owned by a friend of President Putin. And I rushed out trying to get my suitcase back, and they couldn't find it for a good 25 minutes. And later I found out that a hard disk was missing from my suitcase. So there were things that were happening, but I had no idea that this was such a concerted effort. And one reason that I didn't pay attention or didn't notice it, because the Russian spies chose to use non-Russians for the espionage operation, making it much, much harder for me to spot any surveillance operation.
I mean, there were other things that we know they tried to do. Were you aware, for example, of people sitting next to you on planes? Did that actually ever happen? We look at this Operation One, which was uncovered with this, following the arrest. There was their options in relation to Mr. Grozev, it says here, including placing a team member in seats next to him on planes. He was followed throughout Europe, and properties connected to him were watched in Austria and Bulgaria. Were you ever aware of that in close proximity?
Not in real time. I do see now videos of me getting on a plane. I don't think in any case was there anybody sitting next to me in the seat. This did happen to my colleague Roman Dobrohotov when somebody with spyglasses, a woman with spyglasses, was sitting literally next to him and prying into or looking into, peeking into his phone and trying to steal his PIN code. That didn't happen to me. However, this spy group did rent an Airbnb literally across the street from my apartment in Vienna. And for several months, we're watching the entry and exit of everybody who was coming to my apartment, including myself. And that obviously is blood-curdling when you see it now. It endangered my family. They broke into my apartment, apparently, and we never noticed because they thought they had stolen my work laptop. In fact, they had stolen, indeed, an old laptop that I had stopped using in 2015, almost 6 years earlier. And good riddance, because there was no investigative value in that laptop. But there were many close calls I never noticed.
One of the female members of the team was tasked with essentially what would be described as a honey trap operation. Were you aware of that?
Not in real time again. I never noticed this woman. But after the arrest and after I was approached by the British Metropolitan Police, they showed me a picture, said, could it be possible that this woman befriended you on Facebook? I said, I don't recognize her, but let me have a look. And I did find that in August 21, several months after the initiation of the surveillance operation, espionage operation, I did accept her as a friend on Facebook. And I was wondering, why would I do that? I looked at the logs of my Facebook history, and I found that before she sent me an invitation, she had already befriended my sister, my cousin, a classmate of mine, and 2 colleagues of mine. Right. And naturally, when somebody comes with the recommendations of 5 common friends, you often just accept them.
It was very convincing, isn't it? If they're friends with friends
Correct.
of mine, then they are to be trusted. Christo, how has this, or has this indeed, changed the way you go about your life? I mean, look, you know, you involve yourself in investigations to do with the FSB and Russian agents and Russian spies and the Russian government. You're an adult, you're an investigative journalist, you know what comes with all that. You were very close, very much part of the Bellingcat team that was close to Alexei Navalny. We all know what happened there. How do you justify the risks that you take, and how have you changed the way you live your life?
Oh, it's totally changed my life. I had to stay away from my family. I no longer live with my family. It's part of the consequence of this, partly also to protect my family from me being the subject of sometimes carelessly irresponsible and incompetent attempts to do something to me. Because in some cases, as we see from the chats now, they had plans to set a house on fire, which wasn't even mine. They considered the option of penetrating my home by inserting a tube that would put in sleeping gas into my home, putting all of my family to sleep and potentially hurting them. So clearly this has changed my life. I live away from them, and I have to live in a country that is not my home. So I don't want to go into more details, but it is it worth it? It's a good question, but clearly if it has angered one of the worst dictators of modern Europe so much that they would spend years trying to go after me, there is in a way satisfaction in that. But is it worth for what it did to my life? I don't know about that. I'm just happy that my children are not angry with me and they're appreciative of the effects of my work on society.
And will you continue to do that work?
I have to. I mean, if I stop it, I think I become an even bigger target.
Christo, thank you so much for giving us your time, and thank you for sharing that experience with us. And I look forward to you continuing your work indeed with Bellingcat. Christo Grozev there telling me about his experiences of being the target of that spy ring. And as Christo described there, part of that operation that involved him, you heard a little bit about what Christo was describing, was there was plans, discussions in the chats of potentially robbing him of his laptop and phone and taking it to the Russian embassy, of burning his property, as you heard there, but also kidnapping him and taking him to Moscow, or even, as you can imagine, taking his life, killing him.